We're starting our plenary panel, which I'm very excited about. And the panel is on exploring the art of psychobiography. So this panel examines psychobiography as both art and science, the intensive psychological study of individuals within their unique socio-cultural historical contexts. Four distinguished scholars will share their expertise in the methodological approaches and practical challenges of psychobiographical work. Our presenters appear in alphabetical order because when it comes to this panel, there is no hierarchy, only a shared passion for the field. So the first will be James Anderson, then Paul Elovitz, then Joseph Ponterotto, then Jeffrey Rubin. So let me read the bio of James Anderson, and then we will give him the floor. So James William Anderson, PhD, is a specialist in psychobiography. He has published dozens of work in this area, culminating in his 2024 book, Psychobiography in Search of the Inner Life, Oxford University Press. A professor of clinical psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Northwestern University, he teaches courses on the psychology of film and the psychology of personality. He is also a faculty member at the Chicago Psychoanalytic Institute and a past president of the Chicago Psychoanalytic Society. He serves on the editorial board of the Clio Psyche. Jim, take it away.
So I thought I would talk about one area related to psychobiography, and my title is Being in Touch with Our Dark Side. I'll start with a story. I was doing what I call a dual supervision. Two psychotherapists, Eva and Bree, were in supervision with me. They took turns every week presenting the case, and the one not presenting the case also participated in the meeting. Eva and Bree knew each other well. Eva comes across as rather scholarly, modest, thoughtful, conservative, self-possessed, and well-spoken. She was presenting the case that week. As she put it, her patient is a mess. This patient, 24 years old, is flowing over with neediness. She had a horribly deprived childhood. Her life has been filled with acting out, attracting boyfriends and finding them inadequate and dumping them, arguing with her mother, getting into yelling matches with her supervisor at work, delving into S&M and indulging in prostitution from time to time for attention and money. In addition, Eva, the therapist, disliked the way the patient treated her. The patient would skip sessions without telling her ahead of time, frequently told her what a bad therapist she was, and would get behind in paying her fees. Eva had a rule that the patient would not smoke during sessions. These were sessions on the internet, by the way, not in person. But Eva would do so anyway. Eva said that she disliked this patient and was angry with her, but was doing the best she could to tolerate her and work with her. I gave my usual guidance. I said that if you had a friend who acted obnoxiously with you, you would come to dislike that friend. That reaction makes sense, and you might well decide to end the friendship. But we have a different frame of mind when we're working with a patient. We manage our feelings and we remind ourselves that we're there to help the patient, and we don't have to expect the patient to be nice to us. I also recommended to her that with a patient like this, you understand how, given her tortured background, she became the way she is, so needy, so greedy for attention, and so desirous to be treated specially. I added, and I even recommend that you think, if I had a miserable childhood like she had, I'd probably act a lot like her. Bree, the person whose case this wasn't, then interrupted. Now remember, she knew Eva well. She said to Bree, I think a part of you wants to be like her. You're so careful and controlled, but your patient goes for it. She doesn't hesitate to express anger, seek pleasure, and speak her mind. And it turned out that Eva agreed with Bree about this. In the psychoanalytic psychotherapy world, we know that each person has a complicated, contradictory, and dynamic inner life. We assume that any feelings or desires a patient has, we are capable of those feelings too. If we work with a depressed patient, we have to draw on our experiences of depression in order to be empathic, or at least of getting sad at times. If a patient wants to kill someone, we have to put ourselves into the feelings we've had when we wanted to kill someone. I had a memorable experience once in which a patient, a drug addict, told me about when she and her boyfriend murdered the drug dealer in cold blood. My challenge was to put myself into a feeling of how I would have wanted to commit that murder if I'd been in her situation. If a patient tells me how she thinks therapy with me is a waste of time and money, one part of me dislikes hearing that, but another part of me has to admit I probably feel like her if I were in therapy with me and felt therapy wasn't helping me enough. The reason I'm saying all of this is because of the relevance to psychobiography, and particularly the relevance of studying a person who acts badly or even is a gigantic evildoer, like the two tyrants I talked about in my presentation earlier today, Hitler and Stalin. To write the best studies possible, psychobiographers have to find the parts of themselves that are much like the pernicious parts of their subjects. Maybe it's close to impossible to do this if a person hasn't gone into in-depth therapy, if the therapist hasn't gone, I mean, the psychobiographer hasn't gone into in-depth therapy and hasn't become familiar with one's own inner world. This concept that we have scraps of envy, hatred, aggression, retaliation, and murderousness within ourselves is central to the psychoanalytic vision. Everyone knows of Freud's concepts of the id, ego, and superego. The id refers to our unruly collection of desires, especially illicit sexual desires and black murderousness. Carl Jung is even more explicit with his concept of the shadow, which he describes as, quote, that hidden, repressed, for the most part, inferior and guilt-laden part of the personality, unquote. In universities, in history and psychology departments, literature departments might be a little better. It's not really acceptable for scholars in most departments, in most of academia, to speak of their dark sides. In my book on psychobiography, I discussed talking with my first cousin, Bill Cux, who's had a long career as a professional actor. He told me how it's different in the theater. If he's playing an evil character, such as Scrooge in A Christmas Carol, or even a far more heinous character like Hannibal Lecter, that he's encouraged to find the part of himself that's like his character. The belief in the theater world is that you cannot effectively play a role unless you can put yourself into the self of the character. And I think the same is true with psychobiography. We have to be able to put ourselves into the being of the person we're studying. My plea, this is my last sentence, my plea is for those of us interested in psychobiography to be in touch with all of who we are, not excluding our positive qualities, such as our capacity to be caring and loving, but also including our most primitive and rawest desires and temptations.
Thank you, Jim, very much. Thank you. So I just want to reveal, I asked the presenters whether they want to take 10 minutes and then have less time for discussion, and they all elected to have less minutes, meaning 7 minutes per person, and then having more time for discussions. So that's why it was short and sweet, but very meaningful. Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. So the next person in alphabetical order is Paul Elovitz, PhD. He's the founder and leader of Psychohistory Forum since 1982 and founding editor-in-chief of Psyche from 1994. A historian, psychoanalytic researcher and prolific author of approximately 400 publications. His work spans presidential psychobiography, pedagogy, and the documentation of psychohistory as a field. The first research psychoanalyst designated by the New Jersey Institute of Psychoanalysis in 2019, founding member and past president of the International Psychohistorical Association, and author of The Making Psychohistory, and editor of the many roads of the builders of psychohistory, and 8 additional books. Okay, Paul, the floor is yours. Thank you. You muted.
I'll pantomime my presentation. This is my 49th session of the International, an organization that I'm extremely committed to. I've presented at every session. But one of my great disappointments is that there's so few occasions when someone has presented a part of a book that they would be coming out for. That was the type of goal we had early on. We had more of it when we had historians who were a main constituency in the very early days. But leaving that negative note, people, ordinary and famous, are utterly fascinating, which is why I started with another colleague about 5 years ago, the Psychobiography Research and Publication Group of the Psychohistory Forum. One aspect of this enterprise is the Psychobiography Reading Group, which meets every other month and thus far has covered 18 individuals, almost all psychoanalysts, such as Winnicott, Runk, Bion, Spielrein, and Jung. Ina, with her usual generosity, electronically collects and then sends out copies of the reading a week prior to each meeting. We do our best to encourage psychobiography, and we have like 200 or 250 people who sign up for it. In the end, maybe only 75 or 150 may show up, but those are very nice presentations. And Ina and I are working to publish a collection of psychobiographies most recently published in Clio Psyche, called Psychobiographies. This is an example with a couple of them in there, psychobiographies and the autobiographies of psychobiographers. Now, biographers are basically self-taught, though it helps to have experience in therapy, literature, or journalism. My lengthy career as a psychobiographer, began in 1976 when, at a psychohistory meeting, I picked up a copy of Jimmy Carter's Why Not the Best and suggested that someone should travel to Plains, Georgia to find out about Jimmy Carter's childhood and personality. Carter was a politician and a peanut farmer who was a strong contender for the presidency in the period of disillusionment after Nixon's Watergate. I became that someone. When I got to his hometown, only a week away from him being elected president, I found myself standing at a street corner outside his brother's gas station, wondering if my 3 days in Plains would be a bust, a loss of time away from my wife and family. I then called one of Jimmy's sisters, who said she was much too busy to give me an interview. because of the art auction and a whole bunch of things. However,
Sorry, Paul, I'm so sorry. There is a request to increase the volume a little bit of your voice, if possible. If possible.
oh, okay. Well, I've got a frog in my throat.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That is the demon. That
Demon? Okay.
I can hear him fine. I think that person
Okay.
should turn up her volume.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry for interrupting. Thank you.
Okay. I thought you were going to tell me my time's up. Okay. And I deliberately tried to keep it short. So I called the sister Ruth, who said she was much too busy to give me an interview because of the art auction coming and et cetera, et cetera. Having recently just been taught in my psychoanalytic training about resistance analysis, I kept her on the phone, agreeing with every reason why she shouldn't be giving me time, but not put in those terms, just being as empathetic as possible. And she said, well, where are you? I said, I'm at the gas station. Oh, you mean my brother Billy's gas station? I'll be there in 5 minutes and pick you up. I can talk to you a little bit as I do my grocery shopping. And when I opened the car door, she looked over a little bit over her dark glasses and said, "How can you, as a New York Jew, know anything about us in the South?" I've never been a New Yorker, but I said to her, "With your help, I may be able to know some things." And we had an interesting time shopping. She, as a producer, a farmer's wife, complained about the prices not being higher of some things. Well, I complained the prices were too high. But we connected as human beings. And so I would end up really working with her for 2 years. And the next time I went to Plains, I spent a couple hours in her home. And she also told me that her brother, Jimmy, had read the material that I and others wrote. Um, so the important thing that came out of that brief interview was her mom, who was greeting everyone at the bus station, but not allowing to shake hands. Very controlling woman who had been hurt. Her hand had been hurt by too much shaking, and somebody's pin that stabbed her. She said, "Oh, you got a interview with my daughter Ruth. Oh, then why did you come by my house such and such time?" And I did. And before I knew it, she's making me dinner. Uh, she's showing me the box of stuff she took down from the attic the week before, including Jimmy's Annapolis diary when he was having a breakdown because they were giving him as a Georgian with a very heavy Southern accent and a little guy with a compulsive smile, a very hard time. And his father came and straightened him out. But he showed in that and another thing from schoolwork, some very self-defeating tendencies. So I wondered, am I going to vote for this guy next week, as I was planning to, who may be self-defeating? And just showed me pictures. The only picture he drew, according to his mom, which was very negative. And she immediately saw my face and pointed to the green in it. Very sharp woman. And I'm busily taking pictures of these things. She wouldn't allow me to go to the post office or some. They had a photocopy machine, but I had a camera with me, and so this was a fascinating experience. I then had to deal with being a presidential psychobiographer for presidents who I didn't like from the get-go. Later on, I get to not liking policies for every president. There's no question about that. Um, so it's been an utterly fascinating career from which I have taken a leave of absence because with the Washington Post identifying 30,000 lies by our current president, who I wrote 14 articles on and had 2 chapters of books published, I was not going to continue during his presidency. Though I couldn't help but slip something into the last issue of Cleo Psyche. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you. So our next presenter is Joseph Ponterotto. So Joseph Ponterotto, PhD, is a professor of counseling psychology at Fordham University's Graduate School of Education at Lincoln Center campus. He's an author of book-length psychobiographies of Bobby Fischer and John F. Kennedy Jr., and recently published The Psychobiographer's Handbook, a practical guide to research and ethics by American Psychological Association, 2025. He's a co-editor of Beyond Weird, Psychobiography in Times of Transcultural and Transdisciplinary Perspective by Springer 2023, and author of nearly 30 psychobiography-focused journal articles. Joe, please take the floor.
Thank you, Ina. Welcome, panelists and attendees. My brief talk is titled The Excitement and Challenges of Psychobiography. First, the excitement of psychobiography. Let me quote renowned psychobiographer William Todd Schultz. There is something a little mesmerizing about locating mysteries in people's lives, then fleshing these mysteries out and, finally, shedding what intensity of light one can on them. I found Schultz's sentiment to be so true, especially in my book-length psychobiographies of Bobby Fischer and John F. Kennedy Jr. Psychobiography is in part art in terms of creativity, seeing beyond the obvious and into the deep recesses of human personality, and embracing emotive, expressive aspects of the artist or psychobiographer's own work in life, as Jim alluded to earlier. It is also, when at its best, a rigorous and theoretically anchored set of research methods. It involves strong interdisciplinary skills in history and psychology particularly, but also in political science, ethnography, and law and ethics. We are not experts in all of these areas, and this is where continued consultation across disciplines is so necessary as we engage our craft. Now, challenges and risks of psychobiography with a focus and 2 examples on ethics. There are many challenges in conducting strong, impactful, and long-respected and cited psychobiographies. There are historical challenges in terms of finding and accessing critical documents of the lived life, particularly first-person document sources. There are cross-cultural challenges, language translation challenges, socio-cultural challenges in terms of attempting to understand a person not from our own zeitgeist and values, but from the zeitgeist of the historical period in which our subject lived. There are a host of methodological challenges in terms of triangulating data sources, integrating data, arriving at plausible explanations, and not rushing to judgment and descriptions of the lived life or explanations of behavior. There are also ethical challenges, and this is where I will focus the remainder of my talk. Let me begin with another quote from renowned psychobiographer Alan C. Elms. Ethical psychobiography doesn't just avoid the unethical. It adds to our understanding of ourselves and other human beings. Ethics is always involved in psychobiography, as a person being studied and psychologically profiled is named in the researcher's report, usually in the title, and is not anonymous. Psychobiographers since the time of Freud have discussed ethical cautions, regarding the impact a published psychobiography can have on the reader. Think how we would feel if someone wrote an unauthorized psychobiography of us, or our parent, or sibling, particularly if the psychobiography was not fair, balanced, accurate, and supported by careful, rigorous research and data integration. Naturally, the ethical vigilance of the research is highest when profiling a still living personality, living presidents, as the writing can impact the person themselves, their career, their reputations, their friendships. Ethical sensitivity is also critical in profiling recently deceased historical subjects, given surviving family member, close friends, and associates. And even for long deceased subjects, we owe it to the historical record and the subject's identity and memory interest, which survived death legally, to provide a thoughtful, well-researched psychological profile. I will end my talk with two examples of ethics across two time frames, a long deceased and a recently deceased historic figure. First, Leonardo da Vinci and Freud, Leonardo da Vinci in a memory of his childhood. In 2021, Italian researchers Vizzozzi and Sabato published a 90-page research article in the journal Human Evolution, reconstructing Da Vinci's genealogical tree across 21 generations, beginning with Da Vinci's paternal great-great-grandfather and up until a few years ago, 2021. Leonardo, right now, has 14 living descendants. I have a list of them here. At the time of the published study, they ranged from 1-year-old to 86 years old. Today, they would span 6 years old to 91 years old. Let me ask our panelists and audience rhetorically, how would you feel if you were one of these 14 descendants and read Freud's neuroses-based psychoanalytic profile of your great-great ancestor? We know from Alan Elms and Walter Isaacson and other historian psychobiographers that Freud's Da Vinci profile was methodologically flawed in several areas. Thus, even when writing about a 15th century notable personality, we have the ethical responsibility of providing a well-researched and balanced profile and not rush to publishing. Freud finished the Leonardo book in 3 months, started on January 10th, finished on March 27, 1910. My second example stems from my own work, and last example, on Bobby Fischer, who died in 2008, a former world chess champion and controversial figure in the late 20th and early 21st century. My initial inquiry into the study of Fischer was my curiosity over whether he was simply eccentric or perhaps was he mentally ill. One chapter in my 2012 psychobiography of Fischer provided a psychological autopsy. In the literature, there had been speculation that Bobby may have been dealing with Asperger's syndrome, may have been on the autism spectrum, may have been schizophrenic. Though I did not formally diagnose Fischer following psychiatry's Goldwater rule, I did review the evidence on which of the speculated diagnoses had the most credibility. Conducting a differential diagnosis, I contradicted the speculations about schizophrenia and Asperger's and noted that there was more evidence Bobby was dealing with paranoid and delusional symptoms. While I received very positive comments on the book itself from a family member, friends of Fischer, academics, and chess players, there was one person who was markedly upset by my collective work on Fischer. Here is that context. Fischer had joined Herbert Armstrong's controversial Worldwide Church of God in Los Angeles soon after his 1972 championship victory over the Soviet Boris Spassky. An anonymous person who was in that church years after Bobby quit the church contacted me. They were furious and insisted Bobby was suffering from some other disorder. I don't remember the specifics. The emails got more and more vicious and threatening to the point that I had to consult with my Fordham University campus security. 2 lessons or points from this scenario. One is that my work harms someone. As careful as I thought I was being with ethical care and consultation, and we have a duty to do no harm. Psychobiographers need to be very cautious in broaching a subject's mental illness, particularly with classifications of illness. Second, is that a psychobiographer or biographer can be at risk physically and psychologically if a reader who may have a psychological instability gets hyper-focused on some aspect of your work. I've talked to other biographers and psychobiographers about this. This touches on my writing on self-care of the psychobiographer. I would like to end with this point. Borrowing from the wisdom of three pioneers in psychobiography, Leon Edel, Alan Elms, and James Anderson. The study of a life is never finished. There is always more to learn, deeper insight to gain, and more documents, personal letters, photos, under a floorboard somewhere in a very old home still to uncover. Thank you for spending these few minutes with me.
Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we have our last presenter, Jeffrey Rubin, PhD. He practices psychoanalysis and psychoanalytically oriented psychotherapy in New York City and North Salem, New York. He teaches at the Object Relation Institute, the American Institute of Psychoanalysis, and C.G. Jung Institute of New York. As psychohistorian and psychobiographer, he is an author of 8 books, including A Psychoanalysis of Our Time, The Art of Flourishing, and Psychotherapy Case Studies, Escaping the Prison You Didn't Know You Were In, and currently completing 2 new books in psychobiography. He has lectured internationally on the integration of psychoanalysis, Buddhism, meditation. Dr. Rubin champions pluralistic psychoanalysis that draws on the best of all psychoanalytic tradition alongside history, art, literature, and anything that illuminates the human condition. Thank you for listening. And now the floor is yours, Jeffrey. You are muted.
Thank you, Ina. I'm honored to be part of a symposium with such distinguished psychobiographers, Jim, Paul, and Joseph. Go where the energy is, my friend and mentor Joel Kramer used to say to me. That phrase guides the beginning of my psychobiographical work. For me, the psychobiographical process begins with feeling drawn to a subject, either out of passion or perplexity, enthrallment or bafflement. On one side, Shakespeare, whom I've loved since high school, and Freud, Winnicott, Kohut, and Shulamith Firestone, whose theoretical reflections and clinical imagination I find endlessly generative. On the other side, the Koch brothers, Trump, David Lane, figures whose behavior disturbed and baffled me, whose inner worlds I felt compelled to understand precisely because I found them so troubling. Both kinds of entry point are valid, both are necessary, and the method I want to describe works for both because it begins not with what I think I know, but with a deliberate and disciplined unknowing. The first move is wholehearted immersion combined with what I call self-forgetfulness. I try to dive into the life world of the person I'm studying, their letters, diaries, autobiographies, biographies, works of art, political writings, independent testimony, without an agenda. I try to bracket what I already believe, what I expect to find, what I think I know. I try to let the material speak to me, teach me, guide me, rather than superimposing my prior assumptions onto it. This opens a space in which the genuine otherness of the person I'm studying can potentially touch and surprise me. What I initially believe can actually be a hindrance because the person I'm studying is always in some ways different from me. Self-forgetfulness is what makes genuine encounter possible, and self-forgetfulness is, at its core, an empathic act, the willingness to set aside our own frame of reference long enough to enter another's. The second move is to return to myself. After immersion comes reflection, empathizing with what arose, letting it develop, playing with it. Here I'm alert to several things that have proven particularly generative in my own studies. Striking imagery and evocative metaphors, the ones that lodge in the mind and won't let go. Winnicott wrote, "The most aggressive and therefore the most dangerous words in the languages of the world are to be found in the assertion, I am." End of quote. Is that really universally true? Do we all experience ourselves that way? Or is that a deeply important and perhaps autobiographical statement for Winnicott? Theoretical contradictions and tensions, places where the subject says one thing in one context and something incompatible in another, are also data points for me. Freud, for example, in my psychobiography of Freud, the wish to see or not to see, that was the challenge. Freud, for example, claimed that the mother-son relationship is, quote, altogether the most perfect, the most free from ambivalence of all human relationships. Freud also simultaneously argued that ambivalence is the hallmark of all human relationships. So that contradiction is not a careless error, it is a clue. It points towards something Freud could not afford to examine directly. Symptomatic omissions, what is conspicuously absent, are another clue. In the psychobiography that I've completed on Shakespeare, mothers are either predatory, like Lady Macbeth or Volumnia in Coriolanus, or they tend to be entirely absent. There's no Mrs. Lear, there's no Mrs. Prospero. Cordelia has no money, has no mother. That's not an accident of plotting, it's a communication, and often where the most important psychobiographical work begins. Throughout all of this, I try to work the way a jazz improviser works, grounded in the fundamentals of human development and motivation, yet capable of springing from the conscious and manifest level to the hidden and unsuspected depths. Not following a predetermined score, but listening to what the material is actually playing and trying to respond to it freshly. What I'm describing is inevitably interpretive. There's no immaculate perception in psychobiography any more than there is in psychoanalysis or history. We select, we emphasize, we omit, we include, we read, we ponder. Our interpretations are provisional and endlessly contestable, but they're not arbitrary. They're hopefully disciplined by immersion, by self-forgetfulness, by the sustained effort to let the subject's life speak on its own terms before we impose our own. And this matters especially, I would argue critically, when the subject is someone whose inner world repels or frightens us. The same method that illuminates Shakespeare illuminates David Lane, the white supremacist, and Trump and Hitler, because self-forgetfulness is precisely what makes it possible to enter worlds we find disturbing without losing our bearings or our moral clarity. We go where the energy is, even when the energy is dark, especially then. And that can bring light, and that can enrich the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Thank you so much.